Tens of thousands of people told to leave their homes tonight amid fears of a storm surge and flooding down the east coast. Refuge centres crowded with rescue workers, but a lot of residents are refusing to leave their homes.
We're used to it anyway. If it comes over there, it'll only run down there and out there. All this is just a load of hype.
So you're not going to leave here at all?
No need.
What about if it actually does flood? What then?
Well, I suppose that's why I've got a loft hatch.
Good evening. From Essex to Norfolk, Humberside and beyond, thousands of homes are said to be at risk tonight from a storm surge and flooding. Soldiers have joined emergency services trying to warn people and reinforce coastal and flood defences. But many are rejecting offers of help, preferring to take themselves and their valuables upstairs and sit it out.
Also on tonight's programme, extreme weather across Europe too, where refugees are dying of cold in the very countries supposed to offer them sanctuary. The UN today accuses governments across the continent of failing the most vulnerable, an accusation levelled by MPs at the British government as well. The mother of all by-election battles looms as one-time Labour leadership contender Tristram Hunt quits Westminster for Kensington, becoming director of London's V&A Museum. Will other Corbyn critics follow? And from the big job to the gig job, why high-earning men's pay has soared in 20 years, but their low-earning colleagues are making far less, delivering pizzas and driving minicabs.
Also tonight, a No Go Britain investigation into disabled access for football fans. The richest clubs in the country have signed up to fix their grounds by August. But will they all succeed?
And there is another old guy that has to sit there and wet himself. And he wets himself because he can't get into the toilet facilities and it's dangerous for him to do so.
The army's on standby. Thousands of people are evacuating their homes. Eastern England is bracing itself for a winter storm surge with severe flood warnings in force along the coast. Residents are being warned that a higher than usual tide could send waves crashing through coastal defences. Add to that the snow, ice and high winds affecting large parts of the country, and it's a rather bleak picture. Our reporter Paul McNamara is in Jaywick in Essex, where householders are being told to leave.
Well, that's right. There are now 17 severe warnings across Norfolk, Suffolk and here in Essex. Severe meaning that there is a threat to life. In the building behind me, there are about 150 people all sheltering from the oncoming storm. There are hundreds more that are staying with friends and families. There are thousands that have been asked to leave their homes. The police have declared this a major incident. But Jaywick was one of the first places to be evacuated. That process started last night. And for some, as we learned today, too many warnings, too often, now means that the message is falling on some deaf ears. The storms hit Scotland first, high winds whipping up waves off Fraserburgh. There was deep snow too in Braemar, causing problems for drivers, but not those with time to spare. Tyneside turned white as the storm snaked south, the hills of Consett in County Durham too, and Birmingham was blanketed. The Midlands even saw the odd blizzard. Sandbags were piled outside shop fronts of the Scarborough Promenade. Lucky escapes for some venturing too close to the sea, pets among them. Danger lost on one surfer braving the waves. And all along the East Anglian coast, severe flood warnings were issued for fear of a storm surge sweeping inland. The Essex town of Jaywick hugs the shoreline tightly. A waist-height wall and not much sand, all that separates seafront bungalows from the elements. Well, this is high tide, and this is the moment that everyone was worried about. But on the streets of Jaywick, no flood water to be seen. It's not waves crashing over the flood barrier that's the issue. It's that the Jaywick is very, very low. It's water seeping up through the drains. But police have now upgraded the warning for tonight's tide, which will happen at about midnight. And now emergency services are going door to door, asking people to evacuate their homes. This is a town that lives in the shadow of a flood that killed 37 in 1953. But while the police are taking no chances, locals are less convinced of disaster striking again.
It's never actually come over the wall. Before they built the rocks, he used to hit the wall and come right over our bungalow. We're used to it anyway. If it comes over there, it'll only run down there and out there. All this is just a load of hype.
Not a problem.
So you're not going to leave here at all?
No need. Ain't gonna.
This is what comes with living in a place like this. It's low-lying. We can't evacuate every time they expect us to.
But what about if it actually does flood? What then?
Well, I suppose that's why I got a loft hatch.
Essex Fire Service disagree. By mid-afternoon, took to the streets, dropping leaflets and talking to residents. This is the letter that's been put through people's doors. It says quite simply, there is a high risk that your home will be flooded by seawater up to depth of 3 metres. And the advice to leave your home. But advise is all that they can do. And if people want to stay put, so be it. In all, almost 2,500 homes were knocked on this afternoon. Not that it showed at the rest centre for evacuees. Apathy, not floodwater, sometimes the biggest challenge for the Environment Agency.
If you see, properties that were flooded in 2013, we think back to 1953, where a great deal of people lost their lives, we would always rather say to people, we have strong evidence there could be a real problem, please do keep yourselves safe.
Some, though, took no chances when evacuation sirens were sounded 24 hours ago. And then what was it like here last night?
Good. We couldn't. We was made more than welcome, and we was comfortable all night long. But obviously, it's not like sleeping in your own bed. But
has this been your bed for the evening?
Yes.
Calm before the storm, possibly. Storm in a teacup, say some. Either way, it could be a long night ahead on the east coast of Essex. Even as our story was playing out there, more and more people have been arriving here. It's still freezing, it's still windy. The Environment Agency is still very worried that many people will be caught off guard. In that building behind me, there is a really warm atmosphere. But beneath that, police, fire and rescue crews are all preparing for the worst. Back to you.
Paul McNamara. Now, it's across countries such as Greece, Italy, Serbia and Turkey where the cold snap is causing the most suffering. At least 5 people are feared to have frozen to death trying to cross over European borders, and the thousands who have made it into migrant camps are faced with long freezing nights and snow-covered tents. Entire families left out in the cold, humanitarian groups say, by governments across Europe, including the UK. Here's our international editor, Lindsay Hilson.
Sun streams through the battered roof, but more often it's snow coming in. The old railway warehouse is no place to live in the Balkan winter. Yet some migrants and refugees in Belgrade have nowhere else to go. Without fire, they die of cold. But burning railway sleepers has its dangers too.
We already have admit 2 guys in the hospital because they have cough and they have lungs problem because of the smoke.
It's not easy to sleep in this cold. It's not easy to do anything. They make do with what they can find and wait in line for food. They're Afghans and Pakistanis, men and boys, highly unlikely to get refugee status in Europe. For them, there's no way forward, and it would be a long, cold, dangerous journey back, even if they were willing to take it.
The main problem is that there are no solution to shelter the people during the winter, and especially this is some of the effects and the implication of the European policies, which do not recognize that the Balkan route is still open.
Further back down that route, near the Greek port of Thessaloniki, about 30 men have been sleeping in tents despite the snowfall.
3-4 days, very cold, very cold. -10, -10, -12.
The Pakistanis fear that if they accept warmer temporary accommodation, which has been offered, it's a prelude to being deported. Greece is the main focus, with 15,500 migrants camping in freezing temperatures across Lesbos, Chios and Samos. In Serbia, 7,500 people are stranded, some 1,200 sleeping rough in Belgrade alone. 300 of them are unaccompanied minors. And there are reports of inadequate winter shelter for 6,000 migrants in the freezing camps of Turkey. In Lesbos, refugees and migrants queued up to get on a ship that the authorities have provided. At least it's warm, and that's where they'll sleep. Yesterday, the Italian Coast Guard rescued 800 migrants coming from Libya, the other way to Europe. The UN Children's Fund says more than 25,000 unaccompanied children arrived by this route last year. Terror at sea, fear of freezing. The perils facing refugees, especially children, grow harsher all the time.
Well, I'm joined now by Lord Dubs, who himself arrived in Britain from Czechoslovakia on one of the Kindertransport trains, and his Commons Amendment allowed unaccompanied child refugees to be offered a safe haven in the UK. Lord Dubs, you've just visited some of the refugee camps in Greece, haven't you? I mean,
yes,
tell us what conditions were like.
Well, I was there a week ago today. It's bitterly cold. Conditions were awful, hardly any heating. In one of them, they'd had to break down the door of the school and burn it to keep their children warm at night. Some of them are sleeping in the streets in Thessaloniki. It's a desperate situation, and what's worse is there's no hope. They're stuck there, and there's no way out.
And when you think back to your childhood and the reception you were given and the safe passage you were given, how did that strike you, the contrast there?
Well, it was much easier for me. I mean, I was fleeing the Holocaust, but having got on a train, having come to Britain, it was always straightforward. No, this is a desperate situation. There are 20,000, 25,000 children in these camps in Greece, 65,000 refugees altogether in Greece and the islands. There are about 800 children who've got no accommodation at all. It's absolutely desperate. And there's a food kitchen with some of those wonderful agencies, Help Refugees and Safe Passage, and they take food into the centre of Thessaloniki to feed people who are homeless. Absolutely awful.
Well, you've mentioned those astonishing figures there of number of children stuck in these freezing camps. How many of those children would you like the UK to take?
Well, so far we've taken 6 from Greece. I think we could take several hundred at the least. I never said we should take them all, but we could take several hundred, and we should do it quickly. Every day is dangerous for these children. It's dangerous because of the cold. They can get ill. Their families are in it. Some of them have families, some don't. Desperate situation. I think we should get on with it.
I mean, the UK government signed up to the amendment in your name, the Dubs Amendment, so that unaccompanied children could come here. Some 900, I think, from across Europe so far. I mean, how much more do you think the government needs to do?
While there are children in such a desperate situation in Greece and elsewhere, perhaps in Italy, I think we should get a move on and take several hundred more at least. That would give a decent life to several hundred. And of course, other countries should follow suit. But we could do it now.
And there's a lot of resistance now. There's a lot of hostility to mass immigration. And, you know, people have sort of hardened their hearts, haven't they, in this country?
Well, I think public opinion still supports the idea we should take child refugees, even if people's hearts have been hardened. And I think it's important that we do this. You know, local communities have been supportive, and the children deserve a better life than they're getting, and they need the safety that they could get in this country.
Well, there are MPs here who are critical of the kind of reception that Syrian refugees are getting when they come over here. What's your reaction to that?
Well, my reaction is that these people who are coming, whether they're children or families, they are traumatized, they're shocked by their desperately awful experiences. And I think it's only right that they need a lot of support and help to get them to get over the shock a bit. They'll never get over it in their whole lives. Get over the shock and have a decent future. And they need support, and local authorities, some are stepping up to the mark, some could do a bit better.
We'll stay there for a moment because we've got more details on that story that we've just touched on there. I'll come back to you and just ask you some more details in a minute. But first, let's go to that report and hear the effort to resettle thousands of Syrians isn't going quite according to plan. That's according to a report by MPs, which says that councils are still confused about how much support they're meant to provide. And there's a shortage of specialist help. Our Home Affairs correspondent, Darshana Soni, has been in Birmingham, finding out how one Syrian family is getting on.
When I am tired, I like watching TV.
Every week, the Albarinis are given 4 hours of English language lessons. They're one of 10 Syrian families housed in Birmingham under the government's resettlement scheme.
When you first came here, what was your biggest difficulty?
Language, yes, because I come from another culture, and I come from another language to here, it's big different.
As well as help with the language, what services should the Albarinis expect to help them integrate here? A report by the Public Affairs Committee has criticised confusion surrounding the scheme. Rather than being granted refugee status, families are given humanitarian protection status, but that means they're not eligible for things like student loans. For 24-year-old Noor, that almost meant having to give up a chance to study computing at university.
I was worried about this. I will lose my university. I was thinking I couldn't study. I was thinking I will lose.
Noor says he was lucky his university stepped in to help. But the committee has found that meeting the needs of all new arrivals is a significant challenge.
The government has pledged to take in 20,000 Syrian refugees by the year 2020. So far, nearly 4,500 have been resettled here. Some councils, like Birmingham, have taken on more than others. Many local authorities have struggled with budget cuts, and they say there's a concern that the government grant provided under the scheme for every refugee that is rehomed isn't enough to cover council costs.
Councils receive £8,500 for each Syrian they rehome in the first year of the scheme, but that drops to £1,000 by the fifth year. The government argues that the level of support that's needed decreases as the refugees integrate. Birmingham, which is facing its seventh successive year of cuts, admits it's a tough financial call.
We're a city of sanctuary. We're incredibly proud to be a city of sanctuary, and we will do all we can to support people who come to settle in Birmingham. But we also understand that we've got challenges in our city, we've got real inequalities in our city, and we want to make sure that we're also supporting our citizens who've been here longer as well.
The first Syrians arrived in the UK a year ago. After criticism that his government wasn't doing enough, David Cameron surprised many in September 2015 by announcing 1,000 refugees would be welcomed before that Christmas. It left many councils scrambling to find provision.
There are many ways to travel.
Many authorities have come to rely on the voluntary sector. In Birmingham, the Amira Foundation stepped up to provide support. Volunteer Mamadou Enji says it's not just about providing English classes.
So it's very important to be able to communicate, feel that they are welcome and accepted. Also to understand the English way of life.
Today's report warns that the government may struggle to meet its resettlement target. But despite the initial difficulties they faced, the Albarinis say they're looking forward to their future here.
Before I came here, I felt like I lost my dreams, but when I came here, I felt like my dreams came back to me.
Over the next 3 years, Birmingham says it's preparing to welcome another 500 Syrian refugees to the city. Darshna Soni, Channel 4 News.
Well, Lord Dubs, whose amendment allowed unaccompanied children to come to the UK from across Europe, is still here in the studio with me. So, Lord Dubs, what kind of support do people who've been through absolutely horrific traumas need when they come to the UK?
Well, they've obviously been very shocked and traumatised by their experiences. I think they need, first of all, if they're children, they need loving care, they need a loving family, they need safety and security. But I think the families as a whole need support, they need help with English language, they need medical conditions. The children have to go to school. Some of them have been without decent schooling for a long time. They need a whole package of things. And it's up to local authorities to do a lot of the providing. But it's up to the government to support local authorities to enable them to do it.
But obviously the question of money comes up, doesn't it? I mean, where are you getting that money from?
I think it's pretty tough for local authorities. Some are finding it less tough than others. But yes, and I think it's up to the government to make that support available. It's a proper thing to do, because then the refugees will be better adjusted to life in Britain and can contribute to our society.
Lord Dubs, thank you very much for joining us. Krish.
Now, his time in the Commons was, he said, both deeply rewarding and intensely frustrating. And with that, the leading Labour MP, Tristram Hunt, announced he was stepping down from Parliament to become the new director of London's V&A Museum. Mr Hunt, a vocal critic of Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, insisted he didn't intend to rock the boat, while Mr Corbyn denied he had lost control of the party and said he wasn't expecting any more MPs to follow suit. Our political correspondent Michael Crick reports.
Shall I tell you something exciting about JCB? Their maiden is Stoke-on-Trent.
Tristram Hunt was once the great white hope of the Labour right, the charismatic Tony Blair Mark II, close friend of Peter Mandelson, tipped as future leader. Now he's quit politics altogether. In his resignation letter to Jeremy Corbyn today, Mr Hunt wrote,
"There were very few jobs that would have convinced me to stand down as MP for Stoke-on-Trent Central, but the post of director of the V&A, the world's greatest museum of art, design and performance, is just that."
He is sad to be leaving Parliament. He's taking on the V&A job, and I wish him well in that. And the last thing I wrote in the letter was, I look forward to visiting the V&A to meet you as director to have a look around.
Like Jamie Reid, who's also quitting as an MP, Tristram Hunt faced a struggle to keep his seat under the new boundaries and looked out of place politically under Corbyn. Ruth Smeeth is the next-door MP in Stoke.
He chose not to serve and resigned when Jeremy was elected. But the Labour Party's always been a broad church, you know it has, and there is a role for all of us, regardless of our political persuasion.
But all the right-wingers are quitting. You know, you've had Jamie Reid and now Tristram Hunt. There'll be loads more before long, won't there?
I think two right-wingers are quitting, and I think both of their decisions are incredibly disappointing for the Labour Party. And it shows
bound to be more, though, aren't there?
I hope not. I genuinely hope not. I need, and my constituency needs, a Labour government.
Tristram Hunt actually was one of the main supporters of trying to sort of get an export ban so that such important pieces of ceramic history would actually stay in Stoke-on-Trent.
Hunt says that one of the things he did as an MP was to help save the historic Wedgwood ceramic collection from being broken up. And the V&A now looks after it here in Stoke. That helped lead to his new job running the V&A in London, which had to be approved by the Prime Minister and the Culture Secretary. Some of his constituents aren't happy with his move.
He was a very pleasant bloke, and I think he shouldn't have stood it down.
Has he spoke to the people who voted him in? Well, it's before he made him resigned. No, he's just told them he's resigning and there'll have to be a by-election. Well, I think that's disgusting. Really, you think he should have waited to the next election? Correct.
He had a lot of dealings with my daughter's school, Haywood High, and what he did was brilliant.
Tristram Hunt was first elected in 2010 after Labour bigwigs fixed the party's selection in his favour, excluding several other strong contenders. Today, one of those contenders hit back.
I'm disappointed. I think we need fighters right now rather than quitters, both people that are going to stay and fight to bring the Labour Party back to electability and a moderate standpoint, and people that are going to fight against the Tories. So he's made his choice, but it's not one I'm very impressed by.
7 years ago, Stoke had 9 BNP councillors. Now, UKIP are strong here, with almost a quarter of the vote last time. And Stoke voted more strongly Brexit than any other British city. So really, Paul Nuttall should stand, shouldn't he, your new leader? You obviously need to get him into Parliament, don't you?
Well, that's up to Paul, obviously. Whoever stands is going to be high profile. I can guarantee you that. We are not going to be going into this and just sort of, handing out a couple of leaflets and saying, never mind. We're going after this.
If not Paul Nuttall, how about you? I mean, you're going to lose your seat in the European Parliament in 2 years. Switch over.
Well, we have a selection process to go through. I'll see what the party says, but, I'd be very honoured.
And Michael joins us live now from Stoke-on-Trent. What are you hearing?
Well, Paul Nuttall told me tonight that he won't be saying anything very soon about his plans for Stoke himself. But frankly, I doubt whether UKIP will get a better chance to get their leader into Parliament than the coming by-election here. Interestingly, this is the only seat in the country where less than half the electorate voted at the last election, so potential non-voters for UKIP there. Now, Tristram Hunt in his letter today to Jeremy Corbyn cited the recent successes of Stoke City as one of the plus points as his time as an MP, although I don't actually recall him playing many games for the club. But the interesting thing about his time here is that he's clearly out of step with his constituency on the big issue of Brexit, but now also, of course, out of step with his party leadership on so many other things. So I can understand why he should have felt disaffected. And now Labour faces two big by-elections. One in Copeland, where they're under threat from the Tories, one here in Stoke, where they're under threat from UKIP. And of course, that means the party's resources will be split between the two campaigns.
Thanks, Michael. Well, I'm joined now from Salford by the Labour Cooperative MP, John Woodcock, and in the studio here is Paul Oakden, chairman of UKIP. John Woodcock, how is the loss of people like Tristram Hunt and Jamie Reid changing the Labour Party?
Well, I'm really sorry that Tris has made the call that he has, but I can understand why, with an opportunity as big as the director of the V&A, he's chosen to do that. But make no mistake, we have a real breadth of talent in the Labour Party. We'll select our candidate up in Copeland, in the next door constituency to my own in Barrow, next week, and the process will obviously get underway in Stoke, and we will select candidates that we will be proud to put forward as members of Parliament, and we will win these two by-elections.
But it's less breadth, isn't it?
Labour has, I think Copeland has been Labour since 1930. In Stoke since 1950, since the formation of the seat, that has been a Labour seat, and we have a government that is in disarray over Brexit. Governments do not win by-elections in the middle of their term. Of course, I'd rather not be fighting these because I will dearly miss my two colleagues. But you know, there are many.
If you think the government is in disarray over Brexit, really would you say Labour is in good shape when it comes to its policy?
You know, we will go and win these elections.
Would you say Labour knows what it's doing? What is Labour's immigration policy, for example?
Well, I think there are really big areas where we've got to get sharper, and immigration is one of them. But on the very big issues, like, you know, what is our attitude to the negotiation over how the UK leaves the European Union. I think, although there was some difficulty earlier in the week on through Jeremy's speech, actually the position that we arrived at, which is that we need to prioritise access to the single market, because an alternative to that would mean a real risk to living standards, a real risk to jobs in the UK, was the right one. So no one is pretending that this is an easy time for anyone in British politics. I mean, the Tory government has no plan over Brexit, got what they always dreamed of, and now seem to be falling apart.
I'm going to ask UKIP themselves what their view is. Just stay there for a second. Paul Oakden, you must be very confident, are you? I mean, if Paul Nuttall doesn't stand, he's a chicken.
Well, I wouldn't agree with that. Paul's in the very early days of his leadership, and he's focusing on being the leader of our party right now.
He's worried about losing too soon, isn't he?
Understandably, he's going to have a very good look at this. As Michael pointed out earlier in his report, there may not be a better opportunity in the near future for UKIP to take that really important second seat in the House of Commons. Paul would be an exceptional candidate, but we have other members who would be exceptional candidates as well. So we're looking forward to going through our process and actually going. You know, we've just heard from John talking about how, of course, Labour are going to win because they've been in power in these seats since the 1950s. Entitlement is clearly their method when they're going to go into this by-election. We're going to go in, we're going to talk to people on the street, we're going to listen to the issues that resonate with them, and that's what I think is going to give us the upper hand in this by-election.
Well, I mean, we were talking about disarray in both Labour and the Conservatives with John Woodcock. I mean, if any party's been in disarray, it's been UKIP recently, hasn't it, over its leadership?
Well, there's no doubt that
we still don't know what you'd be voting for now.
There's no doubt that at the end of 2016 we had our struggles, you know, but 2017 hopefully is going to be our opportunity to get back to what UKIP do incredibly well. It's what we did incredibly well last year. It's what led to that referendum result, which is we're going to be out and we're going to campaign. You know, this isn't a seat that we've just turned up in. We've been campaigning in Stoke for an awfully long time. We know what resonates with that 70% of people that voted to leave the European Union.
Let me put that to John Woodcock. I mean, the point is, Tristram Hunt was out of step with his own voters on Brexit, wasn't he?
Well, all of the main parties in the House of Commons fought on a platform of staying in the European Union, and the country via small margin chose otherwise. But now we all have to turn our attention to what is the best future of the United Kingdom outside of the European Union. What do we need to secure? And frankly, what I hear more from UKIP at the moment is the love of their former leader and others for an authoritarian, potentially dictatorial and very menacing to the UK leader in Russia. So if UKIP ever had a purpose, it was to take the UK out of the European Union, and that having been achieved, now the quite sinister allegiance of some of the people at the top in the way that they heap praise on Vladimir Putin is coming out. And I don't think that people in Stoke or in Copeland or around the rest of the country will be in any way impressed with that. They actually were taken in for some time, I think, maybe understandably, by the idea that UKIP was a patriotic party, but they have shown through their comments about Russia in particular and other things to be anything but. So we are going to relish actually beating them in these two by-elections and showing that actually for Labour, for all of its difficulties, are the people that can offer hope to those to people in those constituencies, and are the only party that has a vision for our schools, for our hospitals, and for the things that really matter to the people of this country.
We are indeed a patriotic party. In fact, unlike the Labour Party's leader, we sing the national anthem when we have an opportunity to. Being accused of being under a dictatorial leader coming from somebody in Jeremy Corbyn's party. You know, John himself isn't a fan of Jeremy Corbyn. At least Tristram Hunt has had the good grace to step away from a leader that he disagrees with.
But what would be the point of voting for a UKIP MP?
Very simple.
To get two UKIP MPs in Parliament who can't do anything.
We know that the 70% of people that voted for Leave in Stoke Central did so because they had concerns about immigration. Now, the Conservative Party's record on immigration is almost as bad as the Labour Party's. Not quite, but almost. The way to send a very clear, concise message to the Conservative Party and to the Labour Party as well is to put a second UKIP MP into Parliament so that those 70% of people that voted for exit from the EU know exactly that that is what their MP is going to be fighting for.
Paul Oakden, John Woodcock, thank you both very much indeed. Now, the soon-to-be President Donald Trump has taken to Twitter again today to denounce a dossier that alleges Russia has damaging information about him. Mr. Trump described it as totally made-up facts by sleazebag political operatives and called it fake news. He also lashed out at former MI6 agent Christopher Steele, calling him a failed spy. Mr. Steele is said to have compiled the explosive but unverified report, claiming Moscow had obtained salacious videos of Mr. Trump's private life. The Kremlin has also denied the allegations. Well, the American journalist David Korn first reported back in October for Mother Jones magazine that a former Western intelligence agent, who he didn't name, had been tasked with the job of looking into Mr. Trump's dealings with the Russian government. I spoke to him a little earlier, and I asked him how credible did the US intelligence agencies believe this source to be.
Well, this is a very, very serious person who had worked previously with the U.S. intelligence agencies. He had a great track record. I spoke to people at the time who had worked with him and who vouched for his previous work with the U.S. government. So, so he came with that amount of credibility. And then when he gave this information to the FBI through contacts he already had there, he was asked about the sources, their reliability, but he was also asked to provide more of these reports.
It's been said that, who was hiring him changed from Republicans to Democrats. Is that your understanding? What does that mean as to whether he was just being asked to find any dirt?
The former spy never knew, well, at least at the time, didn't know who the client was. He was retained by the firm to do this work and did not know whether it was for Republicans or Democrats. So at least that's what he told me. So from his perspective, it was not a partisan issue.
Donald Trump has called him a failed spy. Is that how you would have looked at him at the time?
I don't think anybody would have looked at him and come up with that insulting description.
And so, what's your view of the allegations in these memos? It doesn't seem that we can really take any view on whether any of it's true or not.
Well, I begin with this. He was a serious source. These are highly serious allegations. They're on a subject area that is serious, in which there is a lot of controversy. And so one of the major questions, and this was the point of my article back in October, a week before the election, to what degree had the FBI looked at this seriously and investigated it thoroughly? Had it done so and come to the conclusion that these weren't allegations with any merit? Did it not bother to? Or did it find out something that was indeed troubling, and should the American public have been told at the time? I mean, these are sort of the big questions here, and they're still not answered.
Why do you think he brought it to the media? And do you think the FBI or CIA had anything to do with that?
No, I don't think U.S. intelligence had anything to do with that whatsoever in terms of when I was talking to him. I know that he believed this was an important matter, and he had given the material to the FBI. My guess here is that the FBI did not signal to him that it was doing enough in terms of investigating them, and an election was coming up, and he thought the story needed more attention. Some of the big line issues in terms of a relationship between the Trump campaign and Russians, or certainly a Russian effort to compromise Donald Trump or to cultivate him, was something that he thought there was a basis to believe. And that's why he was perhaps frustrated, but I have to tell you, he was very reticent to talk to me. It was not something that he was happy to do or eager to do. It was not something he was used to doing. I don't think he'd talked to many reporters in the past, but he believed that the information needed to get out at that point in time.
He may now be in danger. Do you think either the US or British governments owe him anything in terms of care?
Well, I would say that any, former intelligence professional in any nation, if they're outed or if they come to public attention, would that there would be some responsibility, at least to have a conversation between the service and that person about their well-being, but also perhaps in this case the well-being of some of the sources who might have been revealed when BuzzFeed released the memos in full.
David Corn, thank you very much.
Well, Theresa May was rather keen to distance the British government and intelligence agencies from the Trump allegations today. At a press conference with New Zealand Prime Minister Bill English, which was meant to focus on a free trade deal after Britain leaves the European Union, Mrs May was asked whether she could reassure the public that British agencies had no role in producing the dossier.
It's a long-standing position that we don't comment on such matters, but I think from everything that you will have seen, it is absolutely clear that the individual who produced this dossier has not worked for the UK government for years.
Almost half of hospitals in England declared a major alert in the first week of the new year because of bed shortages and a continued rise in the number of people going to A&E. New figures show there were 222 serious alerts. That's 6 times higher than the last week in December. According to NHS England, rates of norovirus are 77% higher than last year, while cases of flu are likely to carry on rising too.
Now, Britain has long been a nation of football obsessives, but for many disabled fans, following their favourite team is a massive challenge. That's because some of the country's biggest and wealthiest teams are currently failing to provide proper access to their grounds and facilities. On Monday, a parliamentary select committee will report on the slow progress of Premier League clubs to make their grounds compliant. In the latest in our No Go Britain series, Jackie Adenji-Williams hears from fans whose experience hasn't quite been match of the day.
Football, the nation's favourite sport, enjoyed for more than a century. Each week, hundreds of thousands attend games. But if you're disabled, cheering on your team is not always as easy as it should be. It's been illegal to discriminate against disabled people for over 20 years, but the experience for disabled fans today is still very much stuck in the past. Vicky, Peter and Anthony are fans of different Premier League clubs and have seen it all.
Basic thing when you go to a football game is you want to be able to see the game with your fellow fans. And the amount of times that I'm sure everyone here has looked at the small of someone's back in front because they stand up and our elevated position isn't high enough to see over the top of them, Or worse still, you're stuck in the home end if you're an away fan and you can't celebrate, and if you do celebrate, you get abuse.
We actually sit under an announcement box that's been there for many years, and we get absolutely soaked wet through.
I've been, to every home game so far, and I haven't had a good experience. It's just not on.
Another old guy that's just a little bit further down than me that has to sit there and wet himself. And he wets himself because he can't get into the toilet facilities and it's dangerous for him to do so. Does that sound Neanderthal to you?
If you look at the Premier League guidelines, there is 1 point, 2 lines about access for disabled people.
It's a multi-million-pound business, if not billion-pound business. And they treat the disabled fans as though they don't want them to really be there.
It's like we're in a burden, isn't it?
The Premier League had promised to make all of its stadiums compliant with accessibility guidelines by August this year. But some of Britain's biggest clubs seem unlikely to meet the deadline.
I think it's disgraceful that supporters who are disabled are being prevented from watching the club that they love in decent conditions.
Ian Lucas sits on the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee. And on Monday, it will publish a damning report which will highlight failures in the Premier League.
If the clubs do not comply with the law and take the steps that Parliament has decided they should take, then action should be taken against them. It perhaps should have been taken before now, and I would look at bodies like the Equality and Human Rights Commission to take the necessary action, and for the government to make very clear that they will strongly support action against some of the richest clubs and organisations in the country who are not looking after the fans who want to see their teams play.
But while some of the big boys may not be playing ball, in Ian Lucas's own constituency, 5th Division Wrexham have managed to make remarkable improvements.
Wow. Wow. This is good. This is a good view. This is an amazing view.
Without the finances of the big clubs, the fans themselves got together to fundraise £19,000 to turn the best seats in the house into a viewing platform for the disabled supporters.
How cool is this? And that's pretty much everybody's reaction. So we've seen a demand in platform use, and with a lot of fundraising, a lot of hard work, we've managed to do this. But as I said, we haven't drawn the line under this and said, right, we've done well, pat on the back. We were trying to improve all the time because it needs to be. And without blowing our own trumpet, we're shaming those at the top because there are no excuses. This is the oldest international football stadium in the world still in use. We're a non-league football side with very little resources. When you look at the Premier League and they're trading players for £50 million, it's pathetic. So it's possible, and I think there's too many people making excuses out there.
For Nathan, the changes mean he now gets the full matchday experience.
For me, it's all about community. I think it's just really good to be able to share emotions with fellow fans, enjoy, a sing-along, maybe a pint beforehand.
This programme has previously highlighted the lack of truly accessible toilets around the country, with ceiling hoists and changing benches. For Sarah and her family, the lack of toilets at football grounds is limiting their enjoyment of the game.
Well done. It's in his blood, really. My dad and my husband's dad also lifelong supporters and season ticket holders.
She was recently successful in campaigning for their local club, Southampton, to install a changing places toilet. But only a handful of Premier League clubs have them, making away games no-go.
What did you think of Arsenal Stadium? He would love to go to another away game, but that's going to be very limited for him because there are only 7 Premier League clubs who have changing places currently.
Hadley recently branched out into rugby and went to Twickenham for his first game.
He FaceTimed me from the toilet to tell me about what was going on. Here's me thinking he wanted to tell me what the score was, and I'm going, OK, so, you know, what's the score? You're having a really good time. What's Twickenham like? And he goes, no, Mum, look at the toilet. I'm in the toilet, and it's got a hoist and it's got a bench. He absolutely had his day made.
We contacted all 20 Premier League clubs to ask them whether they'll meet the criteria by the August deadline. Whilst the picture is currently very unclear, most clubs say they have plans to make the changes, but some are uncertain they will do so in time. Newly promoted clubs are being given an extra year to comply, and a few clubs are planning on building new stands or even entire stadiums. This includes Premiership leaders Chelsea, who say their new home will exceed the current guidelines. It would seem unlikely this would be in place by August.
Tonight, the Premier League told us that clubs are working extremely hard to improve disabled access and that some face significant challenges whether they're making changes to old stands or planning to build new ones. They say the commitments are wide-ranging and will set new standards for sport. Princess Margaret's former husband, Lord Snowdon, who campaigned passionately to end discrimination against disabled people, has died at the age of 86. Born Anthony Armstrong-Jones, he had a highly successful career as a celebrity photographer, photographing some of the most famous figures of the 20th century. But after suffering from polio in his teens, he maintained a lifelong commitment to improving facilities and access for disabled people.
President Barack Obama has signed an executive order to ease sanctions against Sudan. The move would see trade and investment resume between the US and the African nation after 20 years. Sudan is currently on America's state sponsors of terrorism list. It's part of an effort by the Obama administration to strengthen ties between the two nations before he leaves office. Two more major car makers are being investigated over diesel emissions tests as the Department of Transport said it was urgently seeking more details. It follows the launch of a US investigation into whether Fiat Chrysler could be using illegal software to hide excess emissions. And shares in Renault have slumped after French prosecutors said they'd examined possible cheating by the firm. All this after the Volkswagen scandal triggered tougher regulations across Europe. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, reports.
The cool of the day, the scent of the trees.
The Grand Jeep Cherokee. More than 4,000 people drive these diesel cars in the UK. Now Fiat Chrysler, which makes it, has become the latest to be dragged into the emissions scandal after US regulators alleged thousands of its Jeeps and trucks contained emissions manipulating software that was not disclosed to the authorities. According to the US Environmental Protection Agency, the software was present inside around 104,000 Grand Cherokee Jeeps and Dodge Ram trucks. While the trucks are only sold in the US, more than 4,000 of the Jeeps were also sold in the UK. It's said Fiat Chrysler could be liable for a fine of up to £3.8 billion. This case clearly has echoes of the VW emissions scandal, the idea that cars perform one way in the lab while chucking out lots of harmful pollutants in the real world. But the US regulators aren't so far accusing Fiat Chrysler of deliberately installing the software to pass the tests. Similar software can be used inside cars to protect their engines, for example, when it's cold. But the US officials are clearly very suspicious, and that's why they're investigating further. The US watchdog said failure to disclose the software was a serious violation of the law.
Intent is actually not a part of the definition of a defeat device. It only requires whether or not you have software on the vehicle which results in elevated emissions during normal driving conditions, and you cannot justify those software codes based on protecting the engine or protecting the emission control devices. That is essentially the question before EPA and Fiat at the moment.
Fiat Chrysler denied using software to deliberately cheat emissions tests, while the company's boss, Sergio Marchionne, said the allegations were absolute nonsense and anyone making them was smoking illegal substances. He's convinced the timing is political. Others agree.
Well, it's clear that the Obama administration's agencies, specifically the EPA here, is cleaning up a lot of loose ends. Yes, we've seen this week the Volkswagen criminal charges come down against some Volkswagen officials. Now we're seeing the Fiat Chrysler charges. In the case of Volkswagen, it was deliberate cheating. They knew they were doing this. It's not clear that that's the situation here.
She's right. Yesterday, VW pleaded guilty to criminal charges by fraudulently installing the emissions cheating software in more than 500,000 of its cars. The scandal has so far cost VW more than $20 billion to resolve. Tonight, the Department for Transport said it was urgently pressing Fiat Chrysler for more information, while in France, an investigation has begun into whether Renault also used software to cheat emissions tests, an allegation the car maker denies.
After the break, it's not such a man's world after all. A new study finds more men are being forced to take insecure, part-time, low-paid jobs, and it's creating a new kind of inequality too. Now, forget the traditional image of the family breadwinner. 1 in 4 low-paid men now works part-time, thanks to the changing nature of the British workforce. A new study by the Institute for Fiscal Studies said men with fewer skills in parts of the country where jobs are hard to find are the worst hit, ending up in insecure, often temporary employment. It's the reverse of what's happening to women, and it's driving a new kind of inequality, as Simeon Brown has been finding out.
Over the past century, how we work and the types of work we do has been a story of constant change. But the pace of change today means workers face a future of uncertainty, and for one group, there's concerning news. The Institute for Fiscal Studies say 20 years ago only 1 in 20 men on low wages worked part-time. Now that figure is 1 in 5. The IFS found that not only are more men stuck in low-paid temping jobs, they're working less too. Men on low pay are now working 37 hours a week, 5 less than they were 20 years ago. In stark contrast, the percentage of women working part-time has fallen.
It's tricky to say at this stage whether the rise in part-time work amongst low-paid men is concerning, because it might be that they're choosing to work part-time to a greater extent than they used to, or it could be that they're struggling to find full-time work, although that's what they'd want, in which case the trend would be more concerning.
So which is it for Rohal Magal? He told us he's had over 10 part-time jobs in the last 2 years.
I'm mopping the floors, cleaning dishes, look after the shop.
And how many jobs are you balancing at the moment part-time?
At the moment, I am balancing with like 4 jobs, 4 jobs, sometimes it's 4, yeah. In the morning, I get up like 6 o'clock in the morning and go to my office. When it gets to 5 o'clock, I get back in Hampstead. That's where I do Deliveroo. And then last hour I go with Uber, where they pay me some good money for extra hour. And then it finishes 11 o'clock in the night. Life is very hard. Yeah, you have to work like 18, 19 hours every day to meet these expenses.
Rohal is a graduate in economics. He did not imagine that in this economy, he'd struggle to find full-time work in his field. This is the current labour market, and many men on low pay find themselves at the sharp end. But the picture on income inequality is mixed, especially as the earnings of low-paid women have grown by 60%. Now the gap between the high and low earners is narrowing, but that's only because of policies designed to offset income inequality. And for those earning the least amount of money, they're still under a huge amount of pressure. And it's for these workers our economy needs to serve up a good helping of secure work.
Tonight's main news, tens of thousands of people along the east coast of Britain are bracing themselves for a storm surge amid severe weather warnings for the second high tide. Thousands of people have been evacuated from their homes in the areas most at risk, including Essex and Norfolk, with the army on standby to help. With ice, snow and high winds affecting much of the country, some train services have been halted, roads and bridges closed, and people in North and East Yorkshire have been warned to stay away from coastal areas.
There's a full weather forecast after this programme.
We're back tomorrow at 6:30. Until then, that's Channel 4 News. Have a very good evening.
Good evening.